told that Deja's family first reported her missing last night, so this has been a fast-developing case. Investigators are treating this as a homicide.
When it comes to a person with intense rage issues, it can only take a second for them to turn into someone you don't recognize. This is the case of a stunning and ambitious 18-year-old girl named Deja Hood from Tyler, Texas. Deja was on her way to accomplishing all her dreams in life. But when a seemingly innocent interaction between her and a friend was taken the wrong way, those dreams were stolen away from her in a second. Deja was a young social media influencer with a big online following. She was hoping to achieve a career in the beauty industry one day, and was especially passionate about all things involving hair, makeup, and fashion. Anyone who knew Deja doubted that she would achieve each and every goal she set for herself. After all, she was incredibly ambitious and hardworking. While attending John Tyler High School, she became known as a dedicated student and as someone who was very outgoing and popular, but also very kind.
She had good intentions. She had only positive intentions on everybody.
On September 25th of 2003, Deja left the home she shared with her mother, Lakita Britton, with plans to go back later in the evening. On that particular day, she was babysitting a 1-year-old child with the help of her close friend, 19-year-old Jamaria Britton. At the time, Jamaria was going through a hard phase in life. He had just gone through a nasty split up with his girlfriend and was in the process of having to move into a new apartment. Deja, being the fun-spirited and joyful person she was, had probably hoped that she would be able to cheer up Jamaria and take his mind off of the breakup. But nobody could have ever anticipated the shocking, tragic events that would actually take place that day. As it got later and later in the evening, and Deja still hadn't made it home, her family and friends started to worry. She wasn't answering anyone's calls or texts, which was very unlike her, especially because she always had her phone on her. Deja's mom, Lakita, had a horrible gut feeling that something terrible had happened to her daughter, so she ended up calling and reporting Deja missing, informing the local authorities that the last person she had been with was Jamaria Britton. The following morning, the cops arrived at Holly Tree apartment complex, the last known location where Deja and Jamaria had been hanging out while she had been helping him with his move. As soon as the cops entered the apartment complex, they were immediately met with a very strange and disturbing sight. There were blood markings throughout the entire property, and the word "loser" was spray painted on one of the entryway walls. It was clear that something incredibly sinister had happened here. When the cops asked Jamaria about the destroyed apartment, including a large blood stain on the carpet, he quickly tried to explain it away as no big deal. He told them that the stain was from his dog who had recently had a medical issue. But if he thought they were just going to buy that story and move on, he was about to be in for a very rude awakening. The cops were convinced that something truly horrific had happened within the walls of this apartment, and they weren't going to stop searching until they figured out what that was. What they ended up discovering, however, was more graphic and awful than they probably even anticipated. As the cops made their way towards an area right outside the apartment where a nearby creek was, they made a heartbreaking discovery. Poor Deja's lifeless body had been wrapped up with sheets and tied together before thrown callously into some large garbage bags. By the amount of blood found at the scene, it was immediately clear that she had been viciously attacked and murdered. The cops had all they needed to arrest Jamaria right then and there and take him into custody.
Have been arrested. There's still a lot of follow-up.
Jamaria Britton is charged with murder in the death of Deja Hood. According to the arrest affidavit, he picked her up from her home and brought her to his apartment at the Holly Tree complex.
The second that Jamaria was placed into handcuffs, he seemed to realize that it was game over for him. He didn't bother to try to come up with any sort of lie for how Deja ended up dead and wrapped up in garbage bags inside of his apartment. He didn't try to pin it on anyone else. Instead, he got right to the point and told the cops exactly what went down. He confessed outright to killing Deja and attempting to dispose of her body. But it's the reason why he did this that will leave you shocked and speechless. Jamaria's story began with him picking up Deja from her house, along with the young child she had been babysitting. Just as Deja had told others earlier, the reason they were hanging out that day was because Deja had agreed to help him move. But despite her generous offer, it didn't take long for things to take a sudden and disturbing turn. Jamaria had been sitting alone in the kitchen of the apartment while Deja was packing up boxes. All of a sudden, Jamaria, who was still clearly not over the recent breakup, began reflecting on everything that led up to the downfall of his past relationship. The more Jamaria thought about his ex-girlfriend, the more enraged he became. His anger grew and grew until eventually reaching a boiling point. Meanwhile, Deja, completely oblivious to what is about to happen, walks into the room. She knows that Jamaria is upset, but she has no idea just how enraged he is at this moment. In an effort to cheer him up, she reached out and gently tugged on Jamaria. It was what seemed to be a completely innocent and harmless gesture. She had just been playing around. But what she didn't know was that Jamaria's ex-girlfriend used to do the same thing to him when they were together. In a second, this simple gesture caused Jamaria to completely and totally snap. He entered a state of uncontrollable rage. He immediately reached out, grabbed a glass bottle, and smashed Deja over the head with it. She was no match for this man's strength and collapsed to the ground but was still breathing. Jamaria could have stopped then. He could have realized that the person she had just violently lashed out at wasn't even the person he was actually mad at, but instead he continued the brutal assault. He reached for a hammer and began swinging it into Deja's head over and over again relentlessly. When he had a second to calm down and process what he had just done, Jamaria panicked. He knew he had just ruined his life forever, and that there was nothing he could do to change it. He then decided that he was going to take his own life. So he grabbed a sharp blade and attempted to use that to complete the task, but when he couldn't follow through, he reached for a firearm instead. Jamaria had the weapon pointing at his head and was preparing to fire it when all of a sudden he had a shocking realization. The 1-year-old child who Deja had been babysitting was still in the apartment. The child was in another room watching a movie and didn't seem to have any idea what had just happened. In a panic, Jamaria decided to take the child and drop him off with Deja's mother. Throughout this whole entire interaction, he never once let on to Deja's mom Lakita that he had just brutally murdered her beloved daughter. But the reality was, Deja wasn't dead, at least not yet. Jamaria left Deja alone in the apartment because he thought he had killed her. But when he returned from dropping off the child, he was shocked to hear her desperately screaming out for help. Like the fighter she was, Deja was still battling for her life. Now, not only was Jamaria in a state of shock, but he was panicked as well. He knew that as soon as one of the neighbors heard Deja's screams, they were going to either call the cops or come over to see what was going on themselves. So in a final attempt to silence her, Jamaria grabbed the blade from earlier and viciously attacked Deja with it. This time, he didn't stop until he was sure that her life had drained from her body. After he had wrapped Deja up in the sheets and garbage bags, he attempted to drag her out of his apartment. He waited until around 3 a.m. to then move her body further and throw it over a nearby fence in hopes of hiding it from sight. He returned to the scene once more and this time placed Deja's body in a creek near the apartment complex. Surely he knew this wasn't going to work. It was only a matter of time until someone walking by in this busy apartment complex noticed the partially concealed bag and decided to see what was inside of it. But at this point, he was just in survival mode and was trying to cover up his tracks any way he could. The cops were able to use Jamaria's very detailed and disturbing confession to piece together the excruciatingly painful and tragic final hours of Deja's life. They also found a large amount of evidence at the scene, including a bloody latex glove, that would also confirm what Jamaria had already admitted. He was the person behind this extremely brutal crime.
That evidence included footprints leading to her body, which was found wrapped up in a sheet in the creek behind the complex.
That led us to then take the suspect to the police department where he was interviewed and ultimately an arrest warrant was issued.
Jamaria was charged with Deja's murder and booked into the Smith County Jail, with a bond set at a whopping $1 million.
Deja Hood had only been reported missing for a day, but it was in this creek here behind the Holly Tree Apartments that Tyler PD found her body this afternoon. We're told that Deja's family first reported her missing last night, so this has been a fast-developing case. Investigators are treating this as a homicide. Deja was just 18 years old.
This man's cruel and callous actions shocked and sickened the entire Tyler community, especially those who knew and loved Deja. The fact that the only reason Deja had even come to the apartment in the first place was to cheer up a friend and do him a favor, and he repaid her by doing this, made it all the more devastating. Deja considered Jamaria a true friend, and he betrayed her in the worst way imaginable after she had done absolutely nothing to deserve it. In Deja's obituary, her mother wrote of her daughter's bubbly and joyful nature. From a little girl, Deja was vibrant and precocious, taking back every person she encountered with her curiosity, wit, and personality. She was a conversationalist with a contagious smile, never meeting a stranger. Deja's close friend Sarah Evans spoke out about her untimely death. She said that even though they weren't blood-related, they were practically like sisters. She described Deja as the most positive person and genuine soul she had ever met.
But it really just hurt my heart. It did. It hurt my heart that she had to sit there and suffer.
Sarah Evans still feels like she's in a dream after hearing reports of her best friend Deja Hood murdered on Tuesday.
Sarah said that she thinks about her best friend's death every second that she's awake, and that sleeping is the only thing that brings her any kind of relief, because then she can forget, if even just for a little while, that Deja is gone and won't be coming back. Sarah also said that she wants her best friend to be remembered as more than just a victim of a horrific, tragic crime. She wants the world to know and remember Deja as the bright and happy young girl she had known since high school. Even though Deja never got the chance to have any children of her own, Sarah says that her nurturing personality made her like a mother figure to everyone around her.
She's like a mom. She has a mom mentality, like 100%. Like she cared for everybody. She loved everybody.
Before Deja's untimely passing, Sarah was usually the person that Deja would go to most often for career advice. Deja told Sarah all about how she wanted to work in the beauty industry and help other women feel beautiful and empowered by doing their hair and makeup. Both Deja and Sarah imagined their futures to be closely intertwined. They wanted to pursue their dreams by moving out into a big city like Houston, Texas. Wherever they decided to move to, they knew they were going to stick together and figure out life as a pair. Sarah expected to celebrate Deja's career success with her one day, just as she expected Deja to celebrate hers. Now Sarah is forced to face the heartbreaking reality of imagining a life without her best friend by her side.
He didn't only hurt her, he hurt a lot of people. He hurt a lot of people.
As for Jamaria, he is still in prison awaiting trial. In the year following his arrest, there has been an update to the case, and his fate is now looking even more bleak than it did before. While awaiting trial, he has been indicted on yet another charge, this one even more serious than the last.
A Smith County grand jury indicted 20-year-old Jamaria Britton for capital murder. Britton was originally indicted for murder after authorities accused him of killing Deja Shanice Hood. According to the arrest affidavit, Britton told investigators he went into a, quote, fit of rage and beat Hood unconscious with an object before leaving the apartment.
Jamaria had already been charged with murder, but in the spring of 2024, a grand jury also found it fitting for him to be charged with capital murder as well. This is a more severe charge, and it means that if he is convicted, he will either face life in prison with no chance of parole, or even capital punishment. Prosecutors have not yet revealed whether they plan to have capital punishment on the table for this particular case. However, this case did take place in Texas, and out of all of the states across the nation, Texas is by far the one that chooses to use this punishment the most. In fact, from 1977 through the end of 2023, there were 586 executions in Texas in total. No other state has even come close to that number. Then there is the fact that this case is one that is extremely cruel and violent. Jamaria was not provoked, but still he chose to brutally attack and murder Deja, who was much smaller than he was. Her death was long and painful, and never once did Jamaria show her any kind of mercy as she was bleeding out on the floor or calling out for help. All of these factors could definitely make prosecutors more likely to decide to try to fight for capital punishment to be considered as a sentence for Jamaria in this case. Even then, he will still have to be convicted. It may still be quite a while until that happens. The legal process has been taking a painfully long time to be carried out in this case. Now, due to the recent upgrade of his charge, it is expected to take even longer.
Britton's trial is now delayed as he will need to be appointed a new lawyer. Only certain lawyers are able to take on capital murder cases.
It seems to be pretty clear that Jamaria will eventually be convicted of Deja's murder. After all, he confessed to everything, and evidence found at the scene confirmed that he was the one who moved Deja's body into the creek. But there is still a possibility for more twists and turns to take place before this case comes to an end. On one hand, it is still not clear how Jamaria plans to plead to his charges. Even though he has already confessed to killing Deja, that doesn't mean he is for sure going to plead guilty. It is possible that he could attempt to plead guilty by reason of mental illness or insanity. If that happens, then his lawyer would have to try to prove to the court that Jamaria was not in a clear state of mind on the night of the murder. They could say that, because of his uncontrollable fit of rage that night, he wasn't able to think clearly and shouldn't be found guilty of murder. If a jury somehow did find Jamaria not guilty by reason of insanity, then he would likely be sent away to a psychiatric facility instead of prison. This is definitely not the outcome that any of Deja's friends or family members are hoping for. They want to see Jamaria pay for what he did by getting the most severe punishment possible. While it's hard to say how this dramatic case may play out in court, one thing is for certain: there is likely going to be a lot more shocking twists along the way, but in the meantime, Deja's loved ones say they will continue to live life in her honor.